Welcome. Today we're beginning an in-depth exploration of a life that really defined this dangerous intersection of high society, the working class, and the criminal underworld in Montreal, especially in the 70s and 80s. We're talking about Franklin Demetrios Shoofey, a name that for many brings up images of a highly visible, flamboyant, and incredibly controversial Canadian criminal lawyer.
And a man whose remarkable career was cut tragically short on a cool October night in 1985.
It is a compelling and, in the end, a deeply sorrowful story.
It really is. Shoofey was, on one hand, this champion of the marginalized, but at the same time, he maintained this alarming proximity to some of the most powerful and dangerous criminal figures in Canadian history.
And his life ended with a contract killing. What I find so striking is that even today, nearly 4 decades later, the public record still officially lists his murder as unsolved.
Yes. The legal community lost one of its most dynamic, if, complicated figures that night.
So we've taken the source material that you, the listener, provided, from biographical notes and investigative reports to news coverage and the accounts of his colleagues. And our goal here is to really synthesize this information. We want to provide some clarity, some context on the man who embodied such extreme contradictions.
A man who crossed so many boundaries.
And who ultimately paid the highest price for his ambition and his unwavering willingness to represent clients that others would deem untouchable.
And to understand the tragedy, you really have to appreciate the complexity of the man. We need to look closely at how his own ambition created this incredibly complex web of adversaries.
Right.
Shoofey's willingness to walk that line between being a legal advocate and a community figure, while, simultaneously taking on the heaviest hitting criminal organizations in the country, it just made him a target.
So we're going to trace that path. We'll start from his incredibly humble working class beginnings and then chart his ascent to fame and ultimately to that fatal night.
Okay, let's start there.
Okay, so let's unpack the origins of this character. This man who would become one of Montreal's best-known lawyers. He had a very unique and I think a highly relatable upbringing.
Very much so. He was born in 1941. And he grew up in the poor, working-class neighborhoods of Montreal. He was the son of Lebanese Christian immigrants.
And that background, that, deep connection to this struggle of the common person and the immigrant experience, it seems like that's the authentic root of his later political aspirations.
It didn't just shape him. It really defined his entire worldview. And there's a fascinating little story behind his name, Franklin Demetrios Shoofey. It perfectly captures that immigrant experience.
The tension between assimilation and tradition.
Exactly. His mother, who clearly had these strong, American-influenced democratic ideals, she wanted to name him after the U.S. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
But the local Greek Orthodox priest, he had other ideas, right?
He did. The priest intervened, and he insisted that the child had to be named after a recognized saint. So they compromised.
Resulting in Franklin Demetrios.
Yes. And that combination of names, the ambitious American icon and the traditional religious structure, it's almost a perfect metaphor for his entire life. He was always balancing this wildly ambitious ideal with the prescribed boundaries of society.
And that ambition, that drive, it was really forged in significant financial hardship.
A pivotal event happened when he was only 17. His father died.
And that immediately forced him to shoulder this tremendous responsibility. He had to start working right away to support his mother and to finance his own education.
He was running on pure hustle from a very young age. The sources, they paint this picture of a relentless self-starter. He was working constantly as a law student, just moving from job to pay tuition and bills.
Selling encyclopedias, insurance.
Furnaces, you name it. This period was crucial because it instilled that legendary, almost unbelievable work ethic that he became famous for later in life. He got his BA from McGill in '61, and then his law degree, a Bachelor of Civil Law, in 1964.
Which brings us to what could have been a career-defining failure. But instead, it became this massive professional pivot for him.
Yes, that's right. The sources note this crucial failure right out of law school. He failed his bar examinations for civil law.
So his initial plan was to practice civil law.
It was. But instead of quitting or even just repeating the exam, he switched his focus completely. He moved over to the criminal sphere. He essentially found his destiny through a rejection.
And criminal law was where he truly excelled. He became known almost instantly as a flamboyant, colorful character.
Which wasn't an easy thing to pull off in the traditionally sober legal landscape of Montreal at the time.
No, and this visibility was clearly intentional on his part.
Absolutely. He embraced the drama of the courtroom. His work ethic, as we noted, it was legendary. He was a workaholic in the truest sense. He often claimed he worked 16 to 18 hours per day.
And that was driven by this core belief that his clients were entitled to the maximum effort, every resource, for an acquittal.
For Shoofey, this wasn't just a job. It was total, all-consuming immersion in the legal defense of the accused.
So how do we square that level of dedication with the nature of his clientele? He was famously, maybe even notoriously, upfront about who he represented.
He had a refreshing, if maybe an unnerving clarity about his profession. He openly admitted that 90% of the people he represented were factually guilty.
Wow.
But for him, that didn't matter. This public admission, it demonstrates his absolute commitment to the legal principle that every single person, no matter how notorious, deserves a rigorous, zealous defense.
He understood the purpose of his profession wasn't to judge guilt, but to ensure the prosecution met its burden of proof.
Exactly. He was quoted saying, "If you take it, you must do your best."
But even with that commitment to defending the guilty, the sources note he did maintain a clear personal moral line.
He did, and this detail is vital when we consider the tragic end of his career. Shoofey stated he refused cases involving what he called senseless offenses. He specifically mentioned the murder or rape of a little child.
So there was a line he wouldn't cross.
Yes. He maintained that no lawyer is forced to take a case. It suggests a professional integrity that prevented him from pursuing cases that he felt crossed a line of pure depravity. It allowed him to navigate the criminal underworld while, perhaps, keeping his own moral compass intact.
Or at least that was the public perception he cultivated.
But that was the perception.
And that philosophy, combined with his energy, made him a truly aggressive courtroom presence. He was known for his tactics, things observers call grandstanding, and these withering cross-examinations.
It was theater, but highly effective theater designed to create doubt and maximize his client's chances.
And that high visibility was entirely calculated. The sources are absolutely clear. Shoofey saw his spectacular legal success not as the end, but as a stepping stone.
To greater influence, yes. He saw his career as preparation for politics. He genuinely viewed himself as a champion for the poor and wanted to transition that role and that fame into public office.
An ambition that, ironically, would conflict violently and fatally with the company he kept.
Yeah.
So this dual nature, the legitimate political aspirant versus the champion of the accused criminal, that is the central theme of his life. On one hand, Shoofey represented the absolute top tier of Montreal's criminal element.
The people who were making history in the underworld were talking about notorious figures like the gangster Richard Blass.
Right, who was killed in that famous police raid in 1975.
And Shoofey was so close to Blass, or at least so fascinated by his life, that he later wrote an entire book about him. Beyond that, he represented 4 of the men apprehended for the 1978 murder of Montreal's godfather, Paolo Viola.
An assassination that completely shifted the power balance in the city's criminal history.
It did. And representing men involved in events like that automatically placed Shoofey in the orbit of immense power and, of course, immense danger.
So how did a lawyer rationalize this kind of persistent proximity to men who lived entirely outside the rule of law, especially while he was preparing to enter political life?
He adopted a remarkably detached, almost sociological view of them. He described his clients to the Gazette newspaper as a special group of people living by their own rules in their own closed society.
So he saw them not just as legal cases, but as subjects to be understood.
Exactly. He felt he needed to master the rules of their closed society to effectively advocate for them. And importantly, he kept strict professional boundaries. He offered a very telling warning. Any lawyer who gets threats from the underworld usually deserves them.
Suggesting that he, supposedly, avoided the corrupt entanglements that might earn such a fate. He was projecting an image of being untouchable.
An image of being strictly professional.
But that perceived untouchability didn't mean he was just taking high fees and going home. The other side of his life was dedicated to active humanitarianism, far beyond just providing legal aid.
He was truly embedded in the working community. He went far beyond typical pro bono work. He was frequently aiding the poor, sponsoring Christmas benefits, raising money for families affected by crime.
He even founded a community center that provided job information and legal aid.
This wasn't window dressing. He was genuinely focused on social betterment and leveraging his fame for good.
And the case of the paraplegic pencil peddler really encapsulates how he used his high profile for public advocacy.
He was a master of public relations and authentic advocacy. The case involved a paraplegic man who was jailed simply for begging. Shoofey took the case, secured his immediate release, and then used that platform.
The courtroom victory.
Right. He used it to publicly castigate society for creating economic conditions that forced a disabled man to beg for survival. He was essentially telling the establishment, you arrest him for begging, but you were the ones who failed him first.
That kind of advocacy must have earned him a lot of trust.
It did. It showed the public that while he might defend a powerful criminal, he was fundamentally on the side of the powerless.
And what's fascinating is that this credibility, this unique position, straddling the line between the street and the establishment, it made him a valuable resource for the police themselves.
In a very specific, high-stakes role, exactly. Shoofey's reputation meant he was a trusted mediator. The police often utilized his unique communication skills to negotiate in volatile hostage situations.
He was the only person who could bridge that gap.
The only one who could convince highly stressed or desperate criminals to stand down.
And we have details of the last time he acted as a negotiator, only months before his death. It shows how crucial his role was right up until the end.
That incident was in September 1985. An escaped prisoner had taken a hostage. The police knew they needed someone the gunman would believe, someone who spoke the language of the street but was also trusted by the authorities.
So they called Shoofey.
They called him in specifically to assure the gunman that the police would not abuse him if he surrendered. And after a prolonged standoff, Shoofey's assurance worked. The gunman peacefully released the hostage and surrendered.
His ability to do that speaks volumes about the rare level of trust he commanded.
Even among those actively running from the law.
And perhaps the most surprising example of his role as a mediator involves a major religious artifact. This is a detail that really sets Shoofey apart.
Oh, his involvement in recovering the preserved heart of Brother André Bessette in 1974.
It sounds like something out of a fictional thriller.
It really does. So in 1974, the preserved heart of Brother André, a major religious figure in Quebec who was later canonized, was stolen from St. Joseph's Oratory. This was a massive public and religious trauma. The relic was missing for over a year.
And Frank Shoofey was the person who brokered its return.
He was. Shoofey received an anonymous telephone call. It directed him and the police to the basement of an apartment building. And in a locker there, they found the reliquary containing the heart.
And crucially, the source's note, the seal on it, was still unbroken.
Which means the thieves likely recognized the gravity of what they possessed and decided to return it intact. Shoofey managed to facilitate the quiet, non-violent return of this immensely sacred item, using his underground contacts and his stature as a credible figure to the police.
This incident must have cemented his almost mythological status.
As a man who knew everyone and could make anything happen.
So let's move back now to his ultimate unrealized goal, achieving political legitimacy. Despite all this visibility, despite his humanitarian work and his professional success, he continuously failed to get into public office.
And this failure really highlights the core tension in his life. He tried 3 times to get the Quebec Liberal Party nomination in the working-class Saint-Jacques riding, a riding being the local term for a provincial political district.
And 3 times he was blocked.
Yes. The sources state explicitly that party officials pushed him aside. They had significant concerns that his past associations, meaning his connections to the criminal element he so successfully defended, would be an irreversible political liability.
So the very contacts that made him a famous lawyer and an indispensable negotiator ultimately barred him from the respectability he craved.
Exactly. The fame came with a fatal price tag of notoriety. The establishment was clearly worried about the optics. He was stuck in this highly controversial legal world he had mastered.
And in the final months of his life, maybe frustrated by this, he took on a legal action that was as polarizing as any case in Canada at the time.
It showed he was still willing to take on powerful, high-stakes adversaries, but this time, they weren't gangsters.
That's the Morgentaler action, which he initiated just 2 months before his murder. This puts him right in the middle of one of Canada's most intense culture wars.
It does. Shoofey initiated a high-profile legal action against Dr. Henry Morgentaler, who was, arguably the most famous and controversial abortion provider in the country at that time. He was operating in defiance of many laws.
An enormously sensitive social and political issue.
A real lightning rod.
And who was the client that brought this highly unusual case to the mob lawyer?
His client was a man named Reggie Chartrand. He was an ex-boxer and, crucially, a staunch Quebec separatist and anti-abortion activist. Chartrand's goal was to lay abortion charges against Morgentaler based on evidence allegedly in two National Film Board productions.
And Shoofey provided the legal muscle.
He pursued the action aggressively in the courts.
Why would a lawyer known for defending drug traffickers and murderers suddenly pivot to such a high-profile, culture war-defining case?
It's impossible to know his true motivation, but it certainly served his political aims. Taking on Morgentaler, especially alongside a high-profile activist like Chartrand, it thrust Shoofey back into the public eye as a crusader for a politically powerful conservative cause in Quebec.
Away from the stench of the underworld.
Exactly. It showed he was still willing to fight Goliath, even if the enemy was a figure celebrated by the secular and liberal establishment. It was a risky, visibility-maximizing move.
And the sources confirmed that this legal action continued even after his death.
That's right. Chartrand continued the effort after the murder, but a justice of the peace decided against laying the charges in March of '86.
But the fact remains, in the summer and fall of 1985, Shoofey was aggressively pursuing this highly divisive legal fight, while he was also engaged in another explosive conflict.
One that many believe sealed his fate. He was clearly picking very intense battles on multiple fronts.
We've established that Shoofey lived a life of constant contradiction, but if we trace the path to his death, many observers, including his colleagues and law enforcement sources, believe one specific conflict led directly to his murder.
His intense, very public involvement with the Hilton boxing family.
And the subsequent fallout with powerful, organized crime figures.
This is the critical turning point in the narrative. This is where his commitment to his clients directly intersected with the financial interests of a powerful crime syndicate. And this conflict was laid bare by the Bernier Commission.
The Royal Commission.
Yes, established in October 1984, specifically tasked with examining these deep-seated allegations of mafia influence within Quebec's professional boxing scene.
And the findings of that commission were not subtle. They directly implicated one of Montreal's most powerful and ruthless gangsters.
The Bernier Report, which was issued a few months after Shoofey's death, concluded that the entire boxing industry in Quebec was systemically corrupt. The report explicitly stated the sport was controlled by the gangster Frank Shoofey,
who was labeled the guiding spirit of boxing in Quebec.
Which was a public declaration that an organized crime figure had total control over a major sport.
And Shoofey was the lawyer for the Hilton boxing family. A highly visible, successful, but clearly vulnerable family whose careers were central to this investigation.
And the Bernier Report detailed just how deeply Shoofey controlled the Hiltons. The control was comprehensive. It went far beyond simple business management.
The sources say Shoofey paid all of David Hilton Sr.'s bills.
Everything. Rent, groceries, insurance, clothing, furniture. This wasn't professional representation. It was criminal dependency. And Hilton Sr. was known to be a chronic alcoholic. Officials testified that Shoofey was often the only man capable of controlling him at matches.
So Shoofey literally ran the family's life.
Which made their legal representative, Shoofey, essentially superfluous when it came to major financial decisions.
The specific conflict that put Shoofey on a collision course with Shoofey involved the American boxing promoter Don King.
Yes, and a contract that represented a massive financial opportunity for the mob. The Bernier Report cited a police wiretap that captured Shoofey advising the elder Hilton to have his sons sign a contract with Don King, saying it was a good one.
And this detail is absolutely vital. Shoofey, the Hilton's official, dedicated lawyer, was completely excluded from these financial discussions.
Excluded from the talks between Shoofey and King. And that exclusion seems to have gone beyond a professional slight. It fundamentally undermined Shoofey's position and potentially jeopardized his client's financial future.
So Shoofey reacted by using his platform, testifying to the commission, to publicly challenge Shoofey's authority and the contract itself.
His opposition wasn't just vocal, it was insulting to the organized crime structure. It was during his testimony that he offered that famous, cynical quote, "Polo is the sport of aristocrats and boxing is for bums."
He wasn't just defending his clients, he was attacking the entire corrupt infrastructure that Shoofey controlled.
And he didn't just attack the infrastructure. He detailed the financial damage Shoofey's involvement caused the Hilton family. He was very specific.
In a February 1985 interview, he publicly stated his vigorous opposition to the contract,
arguing that if he had been allowed to negotiate, he would have been much tougher with the promoter. He claimed he would have secured a $1 million guarantee for the boys, with big bonuses up front.
So he was essentially exposing Shoofey for tricking the Hiltons into signing an exploitative, financially unfavorable deal.
It was a public accusation of financial fraud perpetrated by a gangster. This was incredibly dangerous.
It sounds like he wasn't just trying to get out of one contract, but attempting to fundamentally reform the system, even if it meant challenging the mob's control entirely.
That's the interpretation many sources put on his final actions. He took concrete steps. He wrote a letter to the Quebec sports minister asking for an agency to be set up to regulate boxing.
With the explicit goal of ending Cotroni's financial and operational influence in the sport.
He was trying to strip Frank Cotroni of a lucrative, established revenue stream and source of power.
And his final public actions confirm just how intensely focused he was on this specific fight, right up until the moment he was killed.
In his last interview, he was still railing against the situation. He compared Cotroni's unchallenged role in boxing to historical cases where baseball legends like Willie Mays or Mickey Mantle were forced to quit their associations with casinos to maintain the integrity of their sport.
And he posed this powerful rhetorical question to the public.
He did. He said, Cotroni had been like a fixture in boxing, and it seemed to be tolerated. If everyone accepted the situation, why blame the Hiltons? He was shifting the blame from his vulnerable clients to the complacent system that tolerated organized crime.
And the sources confirm he spent part of his final evening alive, physically trying to block the deal he opposed.
That is the ultimate tragedy of the timeline. He was shot late that night in the hallway of his office, and his last professional act was attending a Montreal Athletic Commission hearing, specifically fighting to prevent Don King from co-promoting a Matthew Hilton bout.
He was actively physically interfering with what appears to have been a major high-value financial operation run by organized crime.
He died on the battlefield of his profession, so to speak.
It is worth noting the Hiltons' reaction to his death. They viewed him as more than just a lawyer.
Yes, the sources note the family was deeply shaken by his death. They considered him like family. This indicates his personal relationship with them was genuine, reinforcing the idea that he was acting in their true best interests, regardless of the danger.
Which, of course, put him directly and unequivocally at odds with the powerful criminal figures who saw the Hiltons as nothing more than assets to be exploited.
Absolutely.
Let's turn now to the crime itself. The timeline is stark and devastating. On Tuesday, October 15, 1985, Frank Shoofey was murdered late at night in the hallway right outside his fifth-floor Montreal law office.
He was shot multiple times by an unknown assailant.
The brutality of it, the multiple gunshots, the location, it all points to a professional, calculated hit.
It does. However, what happened immediately afterward highlights the complexity and confusion surrounding the motive. Shortly after the murder, the Gazette received a telephone call.
From a man attempting to claim responsibility, immediately trying to muddy the waters.
The caller claimed to represent a non-existent group, the Red Army Liberation Front, and said, I and my colleagues have just assassinated Frank Shoofey. Good riddance.
Which immediately introduced a political dimension to the crime.
Suggesting a link to terrorism or extremism rather than financial or criminal retribution.
But security services quickly dismissed this claim.
Yes, CSIS, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, had no record of such a group. A spokesman correctly suggested the call was a crude attempt to mislead the investigation and divert police attention toward political extremism rather than the far more likely source.
Which was organized crime?
And the consensus among those who covered the criminal underworld of Montreal, the crime reporters, the investigators, it seemed to settle quickly on the latter.
Crime writers Peter Edwards and Michelle Auger later concluded it was likely that mobsters, not some unknown political group, were the killers of Shoofey.
And that aligned perfectly with the context of his recent, highly antagonistic involvement in the Bernier Commission and the Don King contract.
We also have evidence suggesting this murder wasn't a snap decision. A legal colleague of his, Claude Grant, published a book in 2009 that confirmed warnings were circulating long before the actual killing.
That information is truly chilling. Grant stated that word was circulating in underworld circles about a contract being placed on Shoofey's life about a year before the murder actually took place.
And Shoofey himself was apparently warned.
He was, but he dismissed the information as mere hearsay, perhaps relying on his past belief that he, as a true professional, was untouchable.
The atmosphere in the legal community after the murder must have been terrifying.
It was paralyzing. The fact that Claude Grant, a fellow legal professional, went into hiding briefly after the slaying out of fear shows the immediate chilling effect of this type of execution. They understood the power of the people Shoofey had challenged.
A law partner, speaking after the murder, reinforced the boxing theory. But she also took great pains to differentiate Shoofey from the genuinely corrupt lawyers who operated near the mob.
And this is a moment of important human context. It provides the vital distinction needed to understand the tragedy. She confirmed the widespread belief. We all thought that it was because of his involvement with the Hiltons, and specifically their contract with Don King.
She said she believed the involvement with King led to Frank's killing.
She did. But she made a strong point of describing Shoofey as fundamentally professional and not personally corrupt. She contrasted him with a rival lawyer of the time, Sidney Leithman.
And that contrast brings Shoofey back down from this almost mythical level to a human being.
It does. She described Shoofey as a health nut who ate grapes and other health food, and said he did not abuse drugs or engage in the kind of shade dealings others did, even if he did wear a terrible toupee.
It's an essential anecdote. He was not a gangster himself. He was simply a highly aggressive lawyer dedicated to his job.
And he was murdered while doing that job. His personal habits and integrity were clean, yet his professional proximity cost him his life.
Despite the strong professional consensus around the boxing motive, the case remains officially unsolved, which forces us to explore the extremely contradictory and complex theories that have emerged over the decades.
This is where the enduring enigma of Frank Shoofey's death truly resides.
The sources give us at least 4 distinct and sometimes mutually exclusive possibilities for why he was killed.
And the failure to reconcile these competing narratives is why the case persists in the public imagination.
Let's start with Theory A, the one most widely believed by his colleagues and supported by underworld testimony: the Hilton contract and the mob hit.
This theory is the most compelling because it provides a clear motive, a known perpetrator, and a financial imperative. It relies heavily on the testimony of the hitman, Rael Simard.
And Simard directly accused Frank Cotroni of ordering the murder.
He did. Simard explained the mechanism clearly. Cotroni was facing immense financial pressure. He was fighting an extradition request from the United States for serious heroin trafficking charges, and he urgently needed cash for his high-priced legal defense. The key asset Cotroni could liquidate was the lucrative Hilton contract.
By selling it to Don King.
Right. And Shoofey, by continually blocking the deal, became an obstacle that had to be eliminated for a business transaction to go through.
Simard stated that Cotroni had wanted to sell that contract as early as 1983.
But Shoofey kept blocking it, arguing rightly that it was exploitative. Simard's conclusion was direct and professional. Very powerful people in Montreal wanted King to have the contract, and Shoofey was very disturbing for them because he was helping the Hilton brothers.
This positions the murder not as random violence, but as a direct professional intervention in a multi-million-dollar criminal financial enterprise.
Shoofey was sacrificed for a business deal.
Theory B is the previously mentioned warning from his colleague, Claude Grant. It doesn't name a specific cause, but it confirms the generalized danger.
Right. That information just reinforces the atmosphere of imminent danger surrounding him. The warning about a contract being out on his life implies that his actions over the year leading up to his death had accumulated enough enemies to sanction a hit.
The underworld was already viewing him as expendable.
It seems so.
Now, Simard, the hitman who offered Theory A, actually provided a second, entirely different possibility, which is Theory C, the love affair alternative.
This is one of the murkier, less concrete theories in the source material, but it is reported as an alternative speculation. Simard offered it, saying the second possibility was about a lawyer who was involved in some, well, love affair, who apparently put a contract on Shoofey's life.
But there are no concrete details or corroborating evidence in the sources to back this up.
None. But we have to present it as it is, a report of hearsay about a personal or domestic motive, which contrasts sharply with the clear financial motive of Theory A. It just illustrates how wide the net of speculation was cast.
And here is where the ultimate confusion peaks. Theory D comes directly from the Montreal police years after the incident and directly contradicts the prevailing public and criminal consensus.
This is truly the most astonishing detail from our sources. It forces you to confront the idea of a cover-up or a deeply sensitive internal conclusion. Commander André Bouchard of the Montreal Police stated in 2010 that Cotroni and his gang had nothing with his killing.
He asserted that the police knew the killer.
Yes, claiming that this individual was already serving a 25-year sentence for something else.
So if the Montreal police are confident they know who the killer is, and that person's already behind bars, why does the public record still list the case as unsolved? That's the profound contradiction.
It raises a monumental question about the integrity of the official investigation. Bouchard vehemently dismissed the boxing theory as bulls, claiming Shoofey was killed for the craziest reason in the world.
But he offers no specifics about this craziest reason.
Only the assurance that the case is internally solved.
What are the possible implications of that?
Well, if the police claim to know the identity, the failure to publicly charge the individual suggests a few possibilities. One, they lacked the sufficient evidence. A confession, a witness required for a successful public indictment, even if they had an internal conviction. Two, there may have been political considerations or sensitivities in publicly naming the true killer. Or three, the police simply chose to accept that the killer was safely incarcerated for another lengthy sentence and didn't want to expend resources on a formal process that might fail.
So the unsolved status speaks volumes about the inability or unwillingness to provide public closure.
It does.
So we are left with this split reality. The underworld informant and most of Shoofey's colleagues point to a clear, professional mob hit stemming from his advocacy in the boxing dispute.
Well, a high-ranking police commander claims they solved it, but for a bizarre, entirely unrelated personal reason, and the killer is simply already in jail for something else.
It creates a perfect mystery that encapsulates Shoofey's life.
It does. His career touched so many high-stakes groups, the mafia, political power brokers, controversial activist movements, that pinning down the definitive final motive remains impossible based on the public information. But the common thread through all these theories is that his willingness to aggressively confront powerful entities, whatever their nature, guaranteed him powerful enemies.
And as a final humanizing note on his character, we should remember that his law partner, while acknowledging his minor eccentricities, ultimately described him as a man of integrity, a health nut who was fundamentally different from the true criminals he shared a profession with.
He was murdered while at work, dedicated to his profession, a man whose zeal for the law led him to challenge forces far beyond the courtroom walls.
We've reviewed the mosaic of Frank Shoofey's life. The dedicated criminal defense lawyer, the humanitarian, the political aspirant, and the man who fearlessly tangled with the most powerful forces in boxing and organized crime. It's a classic tragedy, a highly visible figure, gunned down late at night, a victim while simply doing his demanding work.
It is a devastating loss that highlights the inherent danger of legal advocacy when it truly challenges entrenched corruption, especially in a city like Montreal in the 1980s. Despite decades passing and these conflicting, explosive claims from police and mob informants, the public record insists that Shoofey's murder is officially unsolved.
And this enduring mystery, it doesn't just reflect a failure to prosecute. It speaks to the deep and perhaps impermeable intersection of law, politics, and organized crime that defined Quebec during that era. Shoofey himself once stated that any lawyer who gets threats from the underworld usually deserves them. Considering the multiple specific threats he faced, from challenging organized crime's financial grip on the Hilton family to initiating high-profile anti-abortion legal actions, what does the enduring silence and the lack of official closure surrounding his true killer tell us about the sheer power and impunity of the structures he ultimately confronted?
It's a profound question.
And it's a question for you, the listener, to explore further.
Thank you for following us through this complex examination of Frank Shoofey's life and death.
Thanks for listening.